My name is Jacques Wood. I am the cello professor at the University of New Hampshire. And today I'm going to be helping you with preparing your videos for this year's all-state auditions. So let's start with scales first. The thing that we're looking for in scales, things that can help you prepare them when you record. First thing that judges usually look for is the sound quality. It has to have a beautiful, smooth quality with a very full sound that isn't abrasive to the ear, so not triple F and definitely not pianissimo. So a nice, healthy mezzo forte to forte. So it should sound smooth and even. Okay, so something that's beautiful. It's something that should be pleasing to the ear. So this brings up what tempo should you use for your scales. For me personally, when I hear auditions like this, scales should be at a very leisurely pace. Not too fast, definitely not too slow. So if you're looking at something like 60 for the quarter, something like that. It could be a little faster too. So maybe the threshold is around 60 to 80 for your quarter note range. Not too fast. What we're looking for, again, is the sound quality, the control. Does it sound good? Now, for your slurs, don't do single bows. I would do a minimum of 2 slurs, perhaps maximum of 4 slurs. So you could definitely do something like, or maybe 4 slurs. And this helps with the flow of the scale. Simply doing single bows, separate bows for every note, one, it'll take a lot of time usually. And it also doesn't give us a sense of a flowing quality to the scales. A couple of more things for you to think about when you're preparing your scales. One is please don't use vibrato. This is in my experience not a good thing. Vibrato is a musical device that helps the resonation of the cello, but it often in scales, when you're presenting them in an audition, for example, it distorts intonation, which is extremely important for us to assess. Is your scale in tune? So no vibrato. Which brings us to intonation. Scales need to be as in tune as possible. One of my suggestions to my own students who have auditions that they have to prepare scales is to use a drone note. If I'm doing G major, I will use a tuner to play a drone note. And I'll use that to refer to tune the notes of the G major scale. So when you practice your scales, please use a drone. It helps refine your ear. It helps refine your physical placement of the notes too. Next, the Marcello G minor sonata. I want to hit just a very couple of important points about the Marcello sonata, the first and second movement. So let's start with the first movement. The character is very stately. Is it slow? Not too slow. It's marked adagio, which literally means at ease. It is not a tempo indication. It's a character indication. So something around 60 beats, 60 for the quarter would be an appropriate tempo. It's not too fast and it's not too slow. So something like 1. Something like that, where you get a pulse of the meter, which is in 3, but is not too cumbersome and not too slow. The character of this movement, as I mentioned, is stately, but it has motion to it. So the sound should be smooth and beautiful. It'll tell us how good your bow control is. One thing I should mention about this particular movement is how to execute trills. So there are 2 parts to this. One is how to properly execute the trill, that is time it, to pace it and to its resolution note. And the other one is do you trill from the note or from above the note? A trill should be like a bouncing ball, where it slowly loses its velocity or momentum because of gravity. So if you think of a bouncing ball going ton, 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 that's kind of like how a trill should be executed. So if I start, it'll be slow to fast. How long you have to hold the trill, is it a quarter note or a half note, for example, will determine the pacing of it. But basically, the shape is slow to fast. Right? There's a trill later in this movement that's a little bit longer. I'll hit that when I hit the second point that I'd like to talk about, which is, do you trill from the note or from above the note? In my own opinion, I like trills in this period, that is the Baroque period, to come from above the note. There's some reasons for this, which I don't need to get into exactly because this needs to be a short video. But it's essentially because the bass notes, you're working against the bass note, and it is a dissonance to the bass note. I won't go into more than that, but it does sound a little bit more dissonant, which in the Baroque period is good. It means it's more expressive. So the trills generally, for me, need to come from above, usually, not all the time, but usually. In this particular movement, in the first movement of the Marcello G minor sonata, it tends to work pretty well. Now, this is purely so it does give a nice sense of line. I'm not saying that it needs to be from above or from the note, but you can choose, right? There are two ways to execute a trill. The second one, it sounds to me a little bit more expressive. The use of vibrato in a slow movement like this. Vibrato was considered an ornament. It's changed its meaning over the years, but I still think you should treat it in a way that is secondary to how you want to phrase. Vibrato follows the phrase, and the phrase is created not by the left hand, but by the right hand. So if I play the very first four measures of the first movement, I'm going to do it without vibrato, and I'm going to try my best to phrase with my right hand. So you notice I'm making a kind of a big hairpin over four measures. Now the vibrato will intensify, that is, get wider as I go to the apex of my phrase. This way, it follows the natural shape of the right hand which you're creating, and it gives you a better sense of a complementary relationship. That is important to me. So I think when you treat vibrato, when you think about vibrato, don't think of it as a constant thing, but it is an expressive device that will help complement or accentuate the phrasing that you make with your right hand. I would recommend when you practice that you practice without vibrato, try to phrase with your right hand, your bow hand, and then add your vibrato to complement it. The last thing before I move on to the second movement is that your rhythm and your intonation need to be consistent. With rhythm, I would practice with a metronome just to make sure that you are keeping a consistent pulse, a consistent beat. So practice with the metronome. And the other thing is the intonation. I would practice with a drone or a needle tuner just to make sure that your intonation is consistent as well. Where you won't be playing with the keyboard or a piano, so it's very hard to refer in the moment to seeing if you're in tune with another instrument. So you have to create this yourself. So practice with the tuner, practice with the metronome, practice with the tuner. Let's talk about character first. The character is in total contrast to the very first movement, which is slow, slowish, and stately. This is very fast and energetic. And I think here's the key word, is lively, energetic character. Now, what does this mean? In terms of tempo, it means your quarter beat will be somewhere between 100 and 120. 100 is probably on the slower side. 120, obviously on the fast side. The thing I wanted to talk about the most here is the articulations involved in making this totally different sounding from the first movement. You have two types of articulations that you're mainly going to use here. One is the articulated staccato or spiccato stroke, and then the legato stroke. If you look at the very beginning part of this movement, you notice that you have notes that are leaping. Something like that. The notes that are skipping, those will be short. Those will be off the string. At the very end of this, you have notes that are next to each other, or notes that are scalar. The notes that are next to each other that go from line space, will be connected. That's a legato bow stroke. So you have a disconnected bow stroke, the staccato stroke, and then the connected stroke, the legato stroke. You put these in contrast to each other very quickly, and you get a much bigger, let's say, dimensional depth to the way that the music sounds. Instead of sounding all the same, that sounds a little, in my taste, not so interesting. But if you pair these two things together, the disconnected versus the connected, then it sounds way more interesting, right? So that's generally, for Baroque repertoire in general, this is a good basic performance practice to do. So you can explore this all the way through the second movement. The other thing that is a bit of a practice tip, there's a lot of fast notes going on in this. So something that I like to do with very fast notes, these are the 16th notes of this piece, starting on, for example, measure 8. You can see there's lots of strings of 16th notes. So you need to make sure that they are clear, that they are even. So one thing that I like to do, it's a very simple but powerful practice method, is to add some rhythms to this. And the basic idea is to work slow to fast in all of these rhythms. There are two rhythms that I like to add. There's a long, short, and a short, long rhythm. And you'll do this, you can do this with a metronome, it definitely helps. You don't have to necessarily right away, but here it goes. So as printed, these are 16th notes. I need to get that faster, and I need to work on the coordination between the shifts and the notes themselves. I want it to sound totally even. So the first rhythm is the long shorts. And because these are separate bow strokes, I'm going to slur two notes together. All right, so I've established that that's a fairly slow tempo, and I can do it. I'm slurring two notes together. I'm doing a long, short, long, short, long, short, long. Now I'm going to speed it up slowly. I'm going to speed it up again. Typically, you would do several repetitions at the same tempo, and then you would speed it up. But I'm just, for the sake of brevity, I'm going to make it faster automatically. Then you'd repeat again, and then speed it up again. All right, so there we go. I went from slow to fast in a very short amount of time. You can take longer, of course. Make your increments smaller as you speed up. Now I'm going to do the opposite rhythm. It's a short, long. I'm going to speed it up now. Okay, so I would do that. You would go through, of course, I'm just going to remind you that this process will take slightly longer for you because you'll do smaller increments of increasing tempo. Now I'm going, so that's step one, do the long, short. Step two, do the short, long, slow to fast. Now I'm going to go back to the way it was printed, but I'm also going to go slow to fast again. And then start speeding it up. This is an excellent strategy for cleaning up the very fast passage work in this movement, the second movement of Marcello. And in general, it's a great practice tool to speeding up anything that is fast and needs coordination. It's a little bit of a, what's the word? It's a miraculous methodology. It's like, it works really well. So I would recommend, there's so many passages in the second movement that you could do this. Don't do it all at once. Choose, I did 2 measures, and it would take me maybe 3 to 5 minutes to go through this process. So you can see that if you are really patient and your concentration stays, then you can get through a lot of this passage work in a very, very short amount of time, and it will be automatically cleaner and more fluent. The last thing, same with the first movement. We're looking for consistent rhythm and consistent intonation. So for the rhythm, obviously use a metronome. practice with the metronome, get used to thinking about how the beats are consistently led from one to the other. And then the intonation, use a tuner. You can use drone notes or you can use the needle tuner. It helps you to do this because it raises the overall quality of the product in which you're performing. I hope that these tips are helpful to you and that you practice well, you practice smart, and I can't wait to hear some of your audition videos. Thanks. Bye.